My name's Yuri Kim. I'm a principal at Forerunner Ventures. We're a digital commerce-focused fund investing in seed and Series A opportunities. We just closed a $40 million fund in July, which we're really excited about. And in our portfolio, we have a couple of probably brands that you guys might know of, Birchbox, Bonobos, Warby Parker, Dollar Shave Club. So a lot of fun companies that we're really excited about.
I'm Christina Farr. I'm a writer for VentureBeat, which is a technology and business-focused publication. And my beat is enterprise, but I do cover a little bit of everything.
I'm Gamil Gran, and I'm with a venture firm called Sierra Ventures. We've been around for about 30 years, a very enterprise-focused firm. And I have kind of an interesting role. I lead a business development function for the firm, which is kind of a new concept as of now 6 years ago, which is how long I've been at the firm. Which is really working with external advisory boards to help accelerate market adoption for our investments. So we've got an advisory group of some 85, 86 as of current count, external CIOs that we work with. These are in-depth relationships. We understand kind of what their buy criteria are, and we bring our new investments to these advisors, first for feedback and then for market adoption, and ultimately to expand the market presence of our investments.
I'm Kathy Lego. You heard before, I was a partner at Oak Investment Partners for a long time in the 80s. I did semiconductor equipment, telecommunications type investments. I did seed investments and angel investments in the 90s, and now I sit on public boards. Some of those public companies are doing M&A activities, so I help them, like at SanDisk, look at a lot of what's happening in the memory, in the enterprise space, Lam Research, what's happening in some technology. So I also do angel investments as Lego Ventures, which is me.
Sweet. I'm Saad. Like some people here, I pillage and plunder for a living. It's pretty awesome. I tend to do it sort of, my philosophy on that has been entirely investing in people. I've been doing it for a while. Tend to be sort of very early stage. I actually created an entity called Placeholder Name, which is usually where I start most of my investments because they have no idea what they're going to do next. And so I tend to be consumer web, digital media. That's kind of my background. I used to work with Guy Kawasaki at Garage. I think I saw that Bill's going to be speaking tomorrow, and in the book round. Yeah. I do a lot of other stuff too. I teach the design school at Stanford. I do a lot of film stuff personally. I'm traveling a lot with the State Department, doing a lot of venture around the world. It's been fun.
Hi, I'm Christine Tsai. I'm a partner at 500 Startups. We're a seed fund, and we also run a startup accelerator program. We're based in downtown Mountain View. We invest very early on. Typically, kind of first investment ranges anywhere from 50 to 100K. But we do a lot of investments. I think we have maybe over 400 companies at this point, and we also are very much focused on international. So we do a lot in Brazil, Latin America, India, obviously a lot here in Asia. So, but we're kind of trying to be all over the world, I guess.
You've even done some Aussie ones. There was a
yes,
startup there once when we came
actually
to
have,
interview.
in this current batch, we have one.
Wow. All right.
I'm Sarah Cohn, and I work at Illuminate Ventures. We're a $35 million micro VC fund, and we focus exclusively on the B2B space, B2B cloud computing space, kind of on big data, mobile, enterprise, business, as software as a service functions. That's me.
You have the coolest shoes of anybody.
Yeah. We got a photo.
Not to insult anybody's shoes. For a B2B enterprise person, those are the coolest shoes. I have a friend who posts her shoes every day on Facebook, so I just
We're definitely going to post that photo on Twitter.
Jacob Nair David, besides noticing shoes, serial entrepreneur, angel investor, and been at it longer than I would care to admit. Although, as I told the story the other day, I was in a startup event in Nablus, Palestine the other day, and standing next to some people and was eavesdropping, and they were talking about a new young entrepreneurs thing they were working on. And I was standing a few steps away and kind of moved closer to hear what they were saying, and they said, "Oh, so sorry we didn't include you in the conversation, but we noticed your gray hair." And I said, "Oh my God, I've become that guy in the gray hair." years. I've gone back to being an entrepreneur, so full circle. But I do feel like for 20 years I've just been raising money all the time, so I can speak to it from all sides of it, both having run a small VC fund and being an angel investor, and back to now being an entrepreneur. So happy to talk about it from all sides of the table.
Well, it's a really diverse, really impressive group. It seems like everybody's been traveling a little bit recently, and you know, is looking internationally now more so than ever. It's not just Silicon Valley. So I'm wondering, you know, in the last couple of years, have you seen interest around the world sort of pick up in entrepreneurship? You know, can we export this Silicon Valley ethos to other parts of the world? What do you think?
We had trouble exporting it to Boston. Okay, 128 has been dying for this. Montana has been dying for this, and these different valleys have been created all over the United States, and London was desperate to try to do this.
Silicon Valley?
Yeah.
And it's so desired, but it's an interesting chemistry and ecosystem, as you've discussed this morning. To try to replicate it is virtually impossible, but not. People won't stop trying.
Yeah, I don't know if you would necessarily completely duplicate what we have here. There are going to be startup ecosystems in different markets, but they'll have their own characteristics, and a lot of it's going to be shaped by that market's culture. So, I mean, one market, just for example, that I personally have been really interested in is Korea, and there's been just a lot of growth there in terms of startups and people wanting to do startups, and part of it is probably that it's kind of glamorous. You know, they see Silicon Valley, they want to be here, they want to be like Silicon Valley, but there are a lot of things about the culture there that is very different from here. And one big example being the fear of failure. You know, here failure is kind of somewhat celebrated. It's kind of a good thing that people are open about their failures. There, it's like, that's probably one of the biggest reasons why people don't want to do a startup. They're very afraid of failing and kind of what that means, you know, to their family and culturally. And it's not just Korea, it's actually, you know, other parts of the world. So, I mean, I think what we're seeing is very optimistic. I mean, that's why we invest so much internationally. But I wouldn't expect that it'd be exactly like the Valley. It'll probably be a long time before some of the markets catch up that much, but they're kind of developing their own version of the startup ecosystem.
This past year, just got back from Turkey. I've been in Jeddah. I've been in Beirut. I've been to Abu Dhabi, Dubai, mostly the Middle East, Malaysia, Hong Kong. You know, what's amazing to me about this stuff is that, look, if you, especially for the stuff that I invest in, which is like web, software, digital media, if you have a laptop and an internet connection, there's no reason why you can't do it from anywhere. And I'll give you one example of something that was sort of kind of blew my mind. So I hosted a startup weekend in Egypt, just post-revolution, and so, you know, we were having our sessions, and if you guys know how startup weekends work, everyone has to come and talk about sort of first they have to pitch an idea, then recruit a team, and in that whole process, it just so happened it was happening on 11 o'clock at night in Alexandria. And at the same time here, we were having a Facebook F8. And so literally as Facebook was pushing out features, timeline, open graph, other things, the pitches that I was seeing were changing in real time to incorporate those features for the water story over the weekend. And, you know, I mean, what blew me away is like Egypt is not typically considered sort of a, you know, innovation hotbed, and yet the ideas that I was hearing, the people that I was talking to, IQ-wise, idea-wise, I mean, it felt exactly like, you know, just like nerds dress and talk here, the way we all are here, it's exactly the same when you go someplace else. When you see people crank, especially engineers, it feels exactly the same. And so that's kind of why I've been on my little world tour here, because it's just been, because I firmly believe that it's the people and the places that we least expect that are actually where the biggest things are going to happen.
Although I still see a lot of language barriers. I'm dual citizen, Israeli-American, and I think the English dominance and the Americanness of being the center of the world combines with, so that if there's a conversation going on in Arabic, for example, it doesn't get really shared so much with non-Arabic speakers, where if something is happening in English, it'll dominate much more. I mean, obviously Hebrew is a real niche language, but you know, if there's a conversation going on in Hebrew, you're just not can hear about it in the rest of the world.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I just think it also opens up other opportunities. I'll give you another example. Also, I was in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, again, not typically seen as a hotbed of innovation. and actually was there at the Google Developer Conference, and there were two guys there who were comedians who were entirely Arabic language, who had phenomenal followings on YouTube. They were literally treated as celebrities everywhere they went. So it turns out in Saudi Arabia you have sort of almost 200% phone penetration.
Right.
You have the second largest consumption of YouTube, mobile YouTube in the world, not on a per capita basis, but on an absolute basis, right? So 20 million people are out consuming everybody but the US. I mean, so I think there's other opportunities that present.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's certainly fun to watch.
There is a problem, though, with the quality of the capital in these other geographies. You know, as we look around the world, you know, I think there's no shortage of imagination and great ideas across the board. You know, there's perhaps some sectors, as you're suggesting, in digital media that are perhaps easier. But imagination of new ideas and concepts seems to spring up everywhere. But the quality of the angel investor community, that seed investor community, to support that early transition and honestly push back really hard with kind of the dynamic conversation that I think we often have here, doesn't bring that quality of deal to the top. So when we see companies come here, I mean, I just had a whole onslaught of companies come from Mexico the other day, and it was just, you know, just a mixed bag of I mean, it was from really poor to pretty good, not the same sort of culling process that we would have here. And who had they met with? Very few people. You know, the kind of experiential pitching that they had is not the same rigor that we would expect before they come into our office here for somebody in a local kind of community. So I don't know that we've exported the investor community as well as we've exported the innovator community.
Oh, and the legal community, the accounting
Yeah, the
community,
broader
the advertising
ecosystem.
community, the people who support the various startup demo, this, and all of that makes you more robust.
Right.
It also gets you in front of people that could join your team.
Yeah.
So when you're past that core group of 6 guys that create this great idea and prototype, you need to recruit the next 20 people. And unless you have that infrastructure out there, it's very hard to get them unless you're plunked in an Israeli university or you know, a university where it's a natural place for, say, okay, who's starting a company? I've got great coding experience, and it's unique. I mean, I have seen so many companies try. I mean, I've had entrepreneurs come back from their native lands after they were successful entrepreneurs. They said, I can't start a company in France.
Right.
I couldn't start a company in Taiwan. I'm coming back here. I've made money here. I've gone back and done my obligation, and I'm coming back here to make my second tranche. And it's a very interesting thing to watch.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think the word even community has really been exported at all, right? So it's pretty amazing. Every meeting I have here, if I walk around the valley, first of all, it's every coffee shop between San Francisco and Mountain View, right? So that's kind of the open source office. So if you ever want to do corporate espionage, it's actually very, very easy in the valley. Oh, it's incredible. All you got to do is you just kind of see who's sitting with who, and you get a pretty good sense of what's likely to happen. But at the end of every meeting that we have, you know, the one question I certainly ask and everyone asks is, you know, what can I do for you? And it's pretty amazing to me how those words don't necessarily make it in other parts of the world. In Turkey, for instance, you know, I suggested at sort of a big office park that they just tear down the walls and create a big community space. And the first thing that they said was, well, then anyone can just steal your idea and you're going to tell it. And so that, to me, was sort of, I think, a big part of this is the notion of community. And I think that's one thing we certainly have here in droves. And in Egypt, we heard the same thing. It's like, yeah, this startup weekend is awesome, and now we're going to go back to Alexandria and Cairo and wherever. And we're not going to see these guys again until you guys show up again for startup weekend, right?
Yeah.
That's a pain.
So when I actually grew up in England, and when I moved here, it was 2 or 3 years ago, and I was shocked by 2 things. One was, you know, the willingness to accept failure. There was even a conference here, FailCon. I was at. It was pretty amazing. It was like AA. Like people were talking, you know, I'm an entrepreneur and I failed 4 times, and everybody was clapping. It was astonishing. And you know, the second part of it is just the super connecting ethos. So everybody you meet says within 5 minutes, I've got these 3 people that I think you have to meet. And I feel like that's a big part of any investor's job. Is just who do you know, and you spend so much time making these connections. Would you agree that that's, you know, such a big part of that job, and how did you cultivate your network?
can I push back on you just a little bit on the failure part of this? So I hear this all the time, right, in the Valley, and you know, I was in the State Department delegation, and we're telling this to rooms full of other people, and you know, hey, in the Valley, we accept failure, and it's great, you know, and it's actually worn as a badge of honor. And I actually don't think that's true at all, and I'll tell you why. Because the reality is, I think people in the Valley certainly talk about failure, but they talk about it after they're successful.
Yeah.
Right? It's when you're an overnight success, then the deck comes out with, oh my God, look at all the things that I messed up. But before that, you know, I don't have entrepreneurs coming to me and say, before that they've sort of made it, telling me about all the things that they've done wrong. So you know, I think there's an opportunity in a lot of other places. It's really hard. The Valley certainly does it better than a lot of other places, but to even push it even further, right? And to really embrace failure, and to really talk about failure, and even publish. I was thinking about the other day about this idea of like a fuck-up resume. Because, you know, the reality is we all have them, right? We just don't necessarily talk about them. And I think if we can just push that out there, and as you guys think about your communities and you go back home, I mean, I would think about how to do it better.
Fuck up con.
It's going to be big.
I would
My
pick up on that a
experience-
little bit as well too, though, because I think that I've actually seen a lot of people come to me, and the ones that have never started anything, it's scary. You're so green. You think everything's so easy. They're like, oh yeah, we'll just we'll build the product, and then customers will come. You're like, well, what's your plan? I'm like, oh, we'll just, you know, Facebook marketing, and it's just like you have no idea how hard this is. And so if you've at least done it once or twice, and you actually tell me you have, then you have a slightly better answer. Not to say that that's going to work either, but you know, you do know that the first 5 things may not work, and so that makes me feel a little bit better about having that conversation and saying, what did you learn? Now, if you failed like 5 times, then maybe I don't want to get on that truck. But
And what about your network? How did you know, what are your kind of tips for cultivating it, especially if you're kind of shy?
So shy and or young. So I've only been in the VC business for a short time, but I was in management consulting, I was in private equity, and then also started my own company. And I thought, how will I offer enough support and networking with all of my new entrepreneurs? And it turns out I know a ton of people. People who went to college with me are now starting companies. People who went to business school with me are now running companies and hiring people, and people need new recruits. And so I can get my MBA friends jobs. And it's not just one way of networking. It's not just that you have to have investor contacts, but you actually need contacts all across the board. And that helps just build what you have to offer so that you can continue building, you know, the investor network as well. And so I would say, you know, you're probably thinking you don't know anybody, and you really do. So have those coffees and really thinking about the conversations that say, hey, well, you know, what can I help? How can I help you? And how can you help me? And let's do this together so that we can both extend our networks, has been really positive for me. So I usually follow up with something to offer an entrepreneur a little bit more advice and a little, you know, another investor friend that they can talk to.
That's the answer. Seriously, the axiom of reciprocalness in the equation, which I think to your community point is a ethos, using your word, that we live by here.
But the
Giving back.
internet makes it so much easier. Email and internet, pinging and touching people
Tweeting at people.
is
Yeah.
so much easier
Oh, yeah.
than getting on the phone and setting up a coffee.
Yeah.
You know, 30 years ago, it was. You had, I mean, part of my job 30 years ago was literally coming up a call list. And who are you going to visit to find new clients? And what are you going to do? And now when I think of how many contacts I have and how easy it is to send out some information to 20 people and get pings back, you can stay fresh in people's mind and you can help people. Can you find my son a job? Send me a resume. Resume goes out. Look at this kid, he's a good kid. It's so much different than, oh, I've got to go meet him, and then I've got to see who's...
Did you get a shot?
Yeah, well, I didn't get one. You know, it's you have to work your network, but your network really is your asset. And I try to tell young professionals that your network has to stay fresh, and you have to work it, or you get stale.
I think you also need to qualify a lot in terms of using your network. I just had this earlier today. Was a guy who I met when he was CEO of a company which failed, and now he started a new thing, and he was asking me for intros to things. And I looked at what he was working on, and I wasn't thrilled with it myself, so I was going to pass on looking at it again for myself. But he asked me for intros to other investors. So then you're in an awkward position because he's a nice guy, and he's a nice guy, but that's about it. So all I can say to people is, he's a nice guy. So there's sometimes, I think, being very honest with people when it's probably not a good idea for that network to get used. And And this is, going to what you said about the depth of the network, and then in terms of things happening, part of the issue, whether it's not just the quality of the deal flow, but there's also an issue of kind of where will this all go, and if the exit path, which obviously interests all of us, if the exit path isn't really there, or it's only if you can buddy up with companies in Silicon Valley, then you naturally kind of get pulled in that direction. I think it's one of the biggest issues in these climates around the world, which you take a look at companies that could start in Israel, which are global by definition because the local market is so tiny. Then where are their exit paths? Well, there's probably going to be companies here. So then naturally, I'd like to talk to people who have connections here. And anything that's going to be in consumer internet, web, blah, 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 because there's no market for potential acquirers, there's no IPO market, so on and so forth around the world, that kind of gravitate, who do you know in Google, who do you know in Facebook, and so on, which then kind of pulls everything back America-centric. And until we find a way out of that, I don't have any kind of lightning bolts a way out of that, but until we find a way out of that, I think people will continue to get pulled this way.
I'd be amazed. Cold pizza works really well to build community, right? I mean, cold pizza, Yelp parties. I can't, I go to 500 Stars all the time and get free meals. I mean, it's like, it's a great deal, right? It's sort of...
I don't get free meals.
Well, the other day, I just got vegetables. But, you guys have certain programs happening all the time, but seriously, I mean, I've sent my startups pizzas on big release days, donuts in the morning, little things like that. There's so many sort of shared workspaces. People appreciate that sort of thing. I know when I was coding, like, pizza was awesome. Pizza and Jolt, right?
It's all about carbs. All right. Well, you raised something pretty interesting earlier, which is how do you strike a balance between making sure that you keep your network warm and also kind of being very honest. So what do you do when an entrepreneur who has had like some stellar success maybe in the past or is well respected comes to you with a pretty terrible idea?
Tell them right away.
Just always honest.
As quickly as possible.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the other thing about Silicon Valley is that people it's so easy to get feedback because people are just always honest. I mean, every deal that comes into us that maybe not everyone, but every deal that comes into us and we review, thousands of deals a year, we try and give them like at least some piece of feedback on. And you really kind of, with investors, you find that. And all of that kind of little stuff that investors do in terms of giving feedback really helps build a sort of culture of high quality companies, I think.
It's funny because there's a friend of ours and a fellow angel investor named Oded Vardy, and he does this shtick of translating Americanism into real language.
I hate your idea.
And they refer to it in the video from Foundry Group, right? It's a definite maybe, which is the American politeness, which often overcomes the honesty.
I don't think that's politeness. It's keeping a deal that they're not sure about.
That's
on the stove
Yes.
in case their buddy in the A venture group decides to do it.
Yes.
And here's my term sheet.
Well, it's even more strategic than that.
Yeah.
It's part of building this community and these people around you. So I may hate your idea, but your background's pretty stellar. Or I know you're connected to a number of other great people. So rather than telling you completely stupid idea, get out, I'd rather say, you might want to think about the following, and let me put you in touch with a couple other people that frankly are going to give you some more feedback on this. And you come back around.
Or sometimes you're just not sure about an idea and you have to talk about it, and then you also give feedback to the entrepreneur, and how they respond to the feedback is, kind of you'll go on the next date or you'll.
I don't think that's always the case. Not just for successful entrepreneurs that have done it before. It's for anybody. Like we're just investors have a herd mentality, or we also have FOMO, which is fear of missing out. So a lot of it is we'd all be lying if we all said, I don't care about other investors. Like we totally care about other investors. Sometimes I've met with companies where the idea was not really that great and was just not that convincing, but somehow they had these amazing investors on board without having launched anything. And so like in some of those cases, like we didn't move forward, but it just shows that once you get one person, everyone will jump on board.
Kristen, actually, that's such a good point because we often do that. We'll be like, are we missing something? Like, and Kristen and I, our founder, will literally be on the phone and be like, okay, I think we think the same thing. This is like a bad idea, right? Like there's nothing actually redeeming about it. So we go through like what do you have to believe for this to be a good idea? And it's really hard.
And Santa Claus, the Easter
Like,
Bunny,
the Easter
and
Bunny,
they're all
and so
on
you're like, okay, so it's the guy, and then you meet the guy, and the guy's really weird. And you're like, wow, like what could we possibly be missing? And so then we sit there and we go, you know what? Then we missed it. Because if we can't get it, we're not going to be good partners. And the one thing that she and I actually agreed on is we see a lot of great entrepreneurs, great businesses. We can't invest in all of them. So she said, it's like getting married. If you say yes to this one, you can't marry that one. And so you
Certain
are,
states.
yeah. So I have to love it so much that I'm willing to go through the pivots, go through the downs, past the other good-looking, entrepreneurs over there, and I'm still gonna love this one. And so that has like brought the bar so high that sometimes when I'm like, wow, I think we're missing something, but I'm okay with it because call me Miss Facebook or whatever. Like that would really suck if I missed that one, but but you have to just hold firm to what you believe in.
I think what you're hearing from us is that we have no idea what a good idea actually is. I mean, and it's
But
only
you have
true.
to do some, or you have to
Oh, I
do
agree.
most, but you can't do all.
Yeah.
Right, and I can tell you, like in my portfolio, certainly, I probably have like one company that actually did what they said they were going to do. So I told all my partners, I'm like, look, the deal here is that we are investing in these people. I can guarantee, the one thing I will guarantee is a year from now they will not be doing this. And I'm right 90% of the time because it's not. So the bet really is the people. And I can tell you, you say a lot of ideas now that are like, the thought that we're going to use this giant SMS chain with 100 million other people to be able to send text messages to each other in sort of a distributed network didn't sound like a good idea until Twitter did it. Right? And the truth of it is, I think most of the ideas that we see they're like that. It's like they don't sound good until someone does them, and then they sound great. So I think you have to be humble when you approach a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. So I often get entrepreneurs complaining to me that they're in the business of true innovation and that they can't get investors because investors are always looking for some new spin on something that's already being done. So they're looking for, the next Instagram meets Square, if that could possibly be. I don't even know, or like,
Sounds good.
Facebook for dogs.
I was working on that.
That sounds
So,
good.
is that something that you buy? Is that valid? Are investors failing to recognize real innovation when it's staring them in the face?
Yeah, we're probably part of the problem. I saw a dog dating service the other day. I was
That sounds like something right up your alley.
Like dogs meet dogs, or like
And I thought, well,
dogs meet cats?
this is innovation beyond I can even understand. I just explain, I'm sorry, what's the deal? Well, your dog's in heat, and you're just like,
Oh my God.
I'm sorry, what again?
Not appropriate.
So it's not
In
owners.
Montana, they have that for cows.
I was laughing so hard, he was quite serious though, poor guy, I do think that we are lemmings. We follow, what's the acronym you use, the FOMO?
FOMO.
But it is very hard to articulate the size of a market that doesn't exist.
The unproven.
Yeah, I'll throw you back. When we, at my firm, looked at Seagate Technology, we knew Al, who ran the company. We had market work that said there would be 40,000, maybe 50,000 disk drives sold in the United States in the coming 10 years. In a nanosecond, they ship that today. But it was as if you couldn't picture who would want a computer that was this big and a drive that was this big in a space that was only 60 inches square. But it was the beginning, and the same with Compaq, who actually had to carry their computer with them. The first cellular phone, who would need to be paged outside of their local work environment? The hospital. Who would need to be touch base? And it's very strange when you look at whole new markets because you're extrapolating what humans currently do. And it's not that. It's really leaping forward to what they really could do if enough of them are doing it.
We look for market traction. So, probably the ideal investment is a huge innovation, but where there's lots of market traction. But if there's not market traction, you're just selling an idea, of an innovative future, and that's just a bit more difficult to sell.
I don't think venture people are innovative, right? It's just, I mean, the truth of it is, I mean, across the board, you know, it's sort of, you look at the structures that have been created for the most part. I mean, venture firms are not run that well. They're not sort of particularly innovative in a lot of ways. I think, you know, and so I don't think you should be looking for innovation from this community. If anything, by the time something becomes sort of a known quantity to us, it's something that's new and interesting, it's not new, right? So, I mean, you know, my advice there is always, I spend all my time with entrepreneurs because those are the guys who are actually out there hustling, figuring out what's working. They know customer acquisition strategies long before you hear about them because they have to make them work for their businesses to thrive. And I think that's, you know, to me, that's the compass that should be used in this context, not, you know, I mean, we can certainly talk about stuff, but by the
I think
time,
that's where angels come in.
Yeah.
Angels will kind of take that risk, and I mean, I think you mentioned, Jeff, you made 300 angel deals, and you have to make 300, so maybe 20 are really successful, but it's that encouraging the entrepreneur to get it from idea and napkin to a prototype, to get a customer, to get the VCs to do the Series A, to do the Series B, and I actually think this whole angel high risk taking environment is really stimulating the ability to have new ideas and new things come to market, because the venture process has become more collegial decision making with the worry about the outcome for the limited partners, and it's taken some of the risk profile away from where it used to be.
Maybe also the crowdfunding. Yeah.
But that's going to be interesting because the filter's different.
I mean, I see a lot of innovative stuff getting funded, like just this in the past few weeks, like genomic printing and, you know, tiny little satellites. I mean, I really do see it. And the times that where I have seen innovation where it's not getting funded is they don't have a complete team. Like they have some science guy who has this great technology but no idea about how to take it to market and how to, you know, kind of commercialize it.
yeah, I disagree. I think, I'll give you an example. So I invested in a robotics company about 4 years ago. I just thought it was super cool. It came out of Idea Lab. It was like, these guys are badass, right? Like some of these guys for fun would do research like, I want to help the blind see through their ears. Like, serious research into it, you know, and reconstruct sort of, you know, plasticity of the brain, all this fun stuff. They could literally build anything, and so it was kind of a playground. And for me, it was a little bit different than most of the stuff I had done. And I can tell you, and the company did phenomenally well. They actually ended up, they could have built anything. They built floor cleaners, as it turned out, sort of hardwood floor cleaners. And I can tell you from, you know, and the company scaled at a revenue run rate that I think from a venture perspective sounded great. But the reality is there's so many rules in venture, they could never raise money in the venture community here, right? The fact was it spun out of Idea Lab, so it had sort of a little bit of a different DNA. No one does hardware, we heard that all on. Robotics is kind of far away. You know, here you had a company that was ramping, I think it actually grew 500% every year. From zero to, and you can extrapolate. It just got picked up by iRobot recently. But it was a nightmare. And I actually think, you know, from that perspective, the company should have been worth far more than it actually was. And it was because there wasn't liquidity sort of in the market that, you know, you couldn't finance it a traditional way. So you know, 3D printers are awesome. I actually just saw a pitch for somebody who's doing 3D printers in space because, you know, it turns out it's actually hard to take stuff up. I have friends who are working on lunar modules, but the truth is, I don't think they're going to get venture funded.
Hardware is
hard.
Well, hardware is becoming cool again because of crowdfunding and other things, but it's still, you know, categorically, you know, we said this for a long time, right? I mean, in the venture community, we don't do education. That happened sort of post 2001. There were a couple big, we don't do display technology. We certainly didn't do robotics until recently. Hardware is kind of coming back because we figured out that crowdfunding actually gives you some of these demand generation, not equity. So it's becoming a little bit cool again, but it's only because somebody may raise a lot of money on Kickstarter and say, wow, you can get $5 million of demand without having to actually manufacture anything. Okay, yeah, that's, but, you know, again, I think for true innovation, for a lot of this stuff, I don't see those things getting funded in the venture community.
So what are, you know, we've talked about some kind of slightly emerging trends that are sort of beginning to accelerate, like hardware, but what's the biggest trend that you see?
software as service. Internet, yeah, right. Nobody wants to spend capital, so if they can just get a little of something when they need it and only pay for the use of a payroll system for a second or an HR this for a second, they're trying to really make their businesses more efficient, and that's sort of where people want to put money. People want to put money in security and access prevention and ways of making sure you're running a a safe business. With add regulation, there'll be a whole fleet of companies that make sure you're meeting all the boxes that are getting checked. We've got healthcare reform, we're going to have another whole fleet of companies that are going to come around and make sure your boxes are checked. What will they create any or solve any disease? No. Will they solve any big problem? No, but they'll get your boxes checked.
So I personally believe we're at the beginning of a generational change in how technology is used. So we're at the beginning of the next Oracle generation or the next SAP generation. And as I said, I'm enterprise focused, so everything's with that point of view. But if, I spent a lot of time with CIOs, as I mentioned, and I just polled them the other day and I said, so who's at risk? Who's the technology provider at risk? And it's a pretty astounding list. HP was number one, of course, Microsoft number two, I think it was IBM, then EMC, and then the list went on. The top 7 guys that we know. If you collectively add up the technology spend that these CIOs had in a room, they were in the $1.5 billion each kind of thing, $40–50 billion worth of spend. They're moving from those traditional spenders or technology platforms to new platforms, and the 2 big sectors are mobility, which is the new application substrate, and big data, which is the transformation of how competitive intelligence, productivity, and all kinds of things will be enhanced, in my mind. They disrupt these big multi-trillion-dollar markets in a pretty meaningful way. So I think we're at the beginning, not at the end, not the middle, just at the very, very beginning of transformation, which is going to create a renaissance of all kinds of opportunities around that.
Is it going to be the CIOs who are actually going to, purchase these new business technologies, or are we looking at?
There's a whole new
CMOs
go-to-market. There's a whole new go-to-market, which is open source and a kind of a collective inside the organization is disrupting the traditional buy. I think the CMO is an alternative, the line of business acquiring things. I think software as a service is another line of business avenue, but ultimately the CIO will create the architecture, just as they did. I've sold to CIOs for years and they go in favor and out of favor and in favor, and right now they're coming back into favor because there's a lot of sloppiness inside of what the CMO has acquired, what the line of business has
They're
acquired.
now reporting to the board.
And they're coming back and they're considered the agent of competitive advantage. How do we take and use big data to predict when weather pattern and global supply chain will make us that much more efficient than our competition? And that data has to be normalized in a way that, frankly, the CMO or the head of sales aren't going to have the tools necessarily to think through. So I'm bullish long-term in a lot of opportunity there, and I think that we're just really beginning. So.
Christina, could we open the questions up to the attendees?
Sure.
Anyone got any questions for the panel? We've got about 10 minutes or so.
Or a cool new idea.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to pitch
Or
the panel.
criticism.
So what should be done in other ecosystems in order to line up the same mindset and make globalization of startup ecosystem?
Traditional or angel investing best practices would be something to export, I think. I mean, for us as a venture firm, we really rely upon good angel investing to kind of get that first stage resolved. So we'd like to go in and say, okay, so smart angel investors, previous entrepreneurs have run them through the gauntlet, given them the first $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, and then they're ready for a challenge test by us. My point about when the Mexico group came to me, they hadn't gone through that, and so the quality was mixed bag. So we probably won't do it again. Like, it was too hard. Skip it.
Right, but should we take, people must travel from here there, or like we do this time, the smart money?
Maybe we should just drop these books out of play.
But you have angel money where the deals are, right?
Right, but these people never did, they are not coming from IT market like angels here, and this is one of the gaps that they don't understand this IT business. They understand real estate, they understand gas and oil.
So you need to come up with an advisory panel that vets some of these deals to give them a lower risk feeling of doing the investment.
So basically
I don't think so. I think
LPs.
unless they learn to live and breathe, and that for me is the fundamental gap between a lot of the angel investing that goes on Silicon Valley, Boston, New York, and some other parts of the world. There's other parts of the world you're finding a lot of people who made money in other areas who are then kind of dabbling and they're thinking they need to diversify their portfolio, and I saw it happen. I saw it started happening 10 years ago in the Arab world, and then it stopped because the bubble burst. But it was way off. It wasn't people who were living and breathing this stuff and loved it. So I don't think advisory, unless those angel investors really deep dive and get to know it a little bit, I think they're not going to be helpful angel investors.
Like one thing that definitely helps spur that is just having role models. So, I mean, there are angel investors who maybe haven't been an entrepreneur before, but there are a lot that they become angels because they've done it before. So in other markets, I've seen other markets where they, they built a company and they've become successful, and then they kind of want to give back to that community. So there start to be a little bit more angel investors. I mean, that's part of it. Definitely, I'll just go back to Korea as an example. There have been a couple or several startups that have been built, and back in the last few years when it wasn't popular to do a startup, and they've gone and taken that risk, and they've sold their company, and now they're giving back as angels, and that's started to help encourage more companies. And there's still a much smaller number of angels than compared to Silicon Valley, but I think a big piece is just it's kind of cyclical. Like it's hard to convince like the existing investors who maybe invest in real estate or things that are less risky to invest in startups now. But if you have kind of this new pool of entrepreneurs who become successful, maybe they come to the U.S. or they're successful there, or whatever their path is, then they come back and they give back to that community. So that's one thing. And I think the other piece, we've seen this a lot with companies in our accelerator who come from outside the U.S. They say it's hard to raise money where they are, whether they're coming from Brazil or Denmark. Like we have one company that they happened to raise money in Denmark. They raised like $1 million, but it was from this Danish VC where like we still haven't finished the actual deal because it's so slow to work with those lawyers, and like they don't quite understand how things kind of operate here. So that's just an example of like that's what they've had to deal with. And this is a company that's like their traction is amazing. They have like millions and millions of uniques a month, but they raise money from this one VC, which has probably terrible terms for them. But for other companies that come from other markets to the U.S., they've actually said coming to the U.S. and kind of announcing that they're part of this Silicon Valley accelerator program has suddenly made them really hot in their market. So now all of a sudden these, whatever small number of angel investors or even funds that are in that market, all of a sudden they're very interested in them because they've kind of had this validation of the Valley. I mean, it's not going to work for everybody, but I've been observing that's been happening with a lot of our international companies.
I mean, it turns out that real estate investing in a lot of emerging markets is actually incredibly lucrative, right? And so you're competing with that asset class. I think one of the things I worry about in sort of a lot of the startup ecosystems that I see is that incubators have become cool again, which is awesome in some ways, but I also worry because if you look at the US market, how it progressed, I mean, we had sort of the later stage people show up first, right? And then eventually you had people who sort of moved down the stack into early stage VC. And then 20, 30 years later, the rise of the incubator. I mean, we started at garage.com, and I would actually argue that when I first started, it was too early, even back in the early 2000s. It's only now that sort of class has emerged, and it's only because you have sort of the full life cycle of funding once you leave. The problem I have with incubation and other parts of the world is fine, you can manufacture a lot of companies, you can get them started, and then you put them off into the wild world, and there's nobody else there to catch them. And so it's a fundamental problem that all these guys have. And I think certainly bridging the gap, coming here, having that liquidity, that's something that it's sort of a rarefied group of startups that can do that, but it's a big problem for people. But my one suggestion though, I think is, rather than having sort of advisors, or certainly celebrating your heroes helps, right, and having emulating models. But I think the most important thing in a lot of these markets is actually just setting it up so that these guys can help each other. Because, sort of the peer-to-peer networks, I would argue that, even here, sort of if you look at the power of the YC network or other, I mean, there's certainly lots of other people and there's sort of, valuation bumps and things that happen, but really what it is that there's somebody next to you who's in the same spot as you are, or maybe just a little bit ahead. And so when you're having a really bad day and you're like, my mom tells me I'm unemployed and, and I'm doing a startup in the Valley, right? Like you have someone else that you can talk to who's like just gone through the same conversation, maybe just raised their first venture funding. And then there's also other people in the community who've actually started to take off. And you can see all those folks and you can sit with them. I don't think it's the top-down stuff that really works. I really think it's about giving people the hooks to be able to help each other.
You also have to have successful exits and try to figure out within the community who will provide the exit. If there's no robust financial market, there's got to be corporations. for other companies that can be purchasing and providing the liquidity. And without that, you create these companies that could be in the living dead, or you create something that got to create a different financial structure for people to win.
Or you have to make money from the beginning, right? I mean, that's
Or
what
be
a lot of
business.
startups realize. If you really want leverage in the market that you're in, and liquidity really isn't there, well, guess what? You get really good at making money, right? I mean, in Malaysia, I met these guys. I was starting in Malaysia online. It's pretty amazing. I mean, they bootstrapped themselves. They had sort of access to very little capital, and it was the way that I actually learned about them was a friend of mine started Friendster. And years later, I remember I asked him because there was this announcement about MOL buys Friendster. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Like, who's MOL and how are they buying Friendster? And it turns out, this guy from bootstrapped it. First of all, he bought the company. He actually turned around and sold the assets to Facebook for more than he bought the company. He took all the traffic. Turns out Friendster actually had a huge brand in Southeast Asia, in the Philippines and other places. Actually has multiplied that traffic, had the monetization model to actually make it work, is making a lot of money. And you've never heard about him before. And the reason is because he wasn't getting written about in TechCrunch. He was actually making money. Right? I mean, that's what he had to do it. He had no other choice. But to me, that's the story you want, right? It's not the guy who raise money from folks here, and it's about the guys who, at the end of the day, build something so big that they can buy companies here, right? And that's, I think, what the promise of, that's available to people, certainly in my sector, because you can actually get profitable pretty quick if you hustle.
Another question is, so there are lots of governments that assign a lot of budget to evolve their own ecosystems. What is the best way to utilize this budget in a smart way in order to help them to build the right thing? Because they think that they're doing the right thing, but it can be way more efficiently spent.
Governments in the United States haven't made good venture capitalists.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we have a model to export.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's an answer.
Doesn't mean that
We need to wind up now anyway, so I just
Fishing,
want to
yeah.
thank you all. This has been one of the best conversations I've ever experienced with VCs, so really appreciate it.
It's a low bar.
Whoa.
Communal high five.
I'm just
Aren't we great?
really, and I've always attended to all the VC conversations, so thank you every one of you, and I hope you're going to join us now for the Investors Social Mixer and have a drink with us and chat and unwind, and thanks so much, Christina, for the
Thank you.
moderation. Fabulous questions.
job.
Thank you.
Thank you.